It is a open world. Now, that may not blow you over right now, but in 1992, that was a pretty big deal. It was an open world fantasy computer role-playing game based in the Holy Roman Empire of the 15th century. But the twist is, it was the Holy Roman Empire as people believed it at the time. So people believed in gargoyles, and they believed in, demons running around, and they believed in werewolves or whatever. And so like in like alchemy's real, you got like the Philosopher's Stone and all of this, and it was bonkers fun.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. Thanks so much for joining. I'm your host, Shane Stacks, and I'm joined by a couple of super cool two dudes. There were two dudes. Just gonna rattle a paper to cover that up. Pull a Letterman. Just rattle my papers.
Distracting.
Yeah, got two dudes joining today. I'm so happy to be doing this episode. I've been wanting to do this show for a long time. One of the things I like to do with Shane Plays is not necessarily talk about what everybody's out there saying geeky is and the mainstream is. Sometimes I just say, here's something I love and I'm going to talk about it. And I hope that you end up at least being entertained and maybe you'll be intrigued to check it out yourself. But there is a super cool role-playing game, actually a CRPG, computer role-playing game from the early 90s called Darklands. And it has, like, everybody that plays it seems to remember it really fondly. It still has a pretty strong following. You can get it on Steam and GOG. But joining me today to talk about it are, one is somebody who's run discussion groups and a website and helped with a FAQ for forever. And it just really has a deep love of the game. And it's Matt Wirkkala. And he's actually helped facilitate the fan community around this game for quite a while. And then my friend, Keith Hiorns, who's been on the show once or twice before. Keith and I both had a love for this game back in the early 90s when we lived in England. So in fact, he remembers it, I think, slightly. I thought I remembered us buying it together, but he remembers getting it from somebody else. But anyway, we were both playing it at the same time and both loving it a heck of a lot. So Matt, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell people just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll let Keith do the same.
When I discovered Darklands, I was already 30 years old, so I wasn't a kid or anything like that. But it really appealed to my love of medieval history and playing what ifs.
And that's one thing we'll touch on. One of the unique things about Darklands is its setting, which is, it may not be as unique now, but it's still not very common to have a setting like this. And it was very, very unique back in the day. Now, so Matt, are you sort of a gamer in general, or is it like, is Darklands your game, or how does that work?
Darklands is what finally got me really paying attention to CRPGs. Up to that point, I had some experiences with D&D, but they weren't really that good. It's not that D&D is bad or anything. It's just that the people with whom I was invited to play along were, kind of piling on the new guy kind of thing. And so, it kind of turned me off. So, but, I loved, reading the core rule books and all that. And I thought, well, this is really great. It just sucks that you have to play it with other people. And then, I saw Darklands, and I was reading about it, and I saw the historical aspects to it. And I thought, wow, okay, I'm not a RPG guy, but this looks like something to check out. And so that actually kind of softened my view on CRPGs after that. And actually, I went back and played a lot of the things that I missed.
You tell us a little bit about, I know that you've helped with the group for Darklands, the fan group. It used to be on Yahoo Groups, But since that shuts down, you've moved it over to groups.io. And then you also help with the Darklands, where you built the Darklands website, and there's the Darklands FAQ version 3 floating around out there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your involvement with both of those efforts, and then we'll move over to Keith.
Yes. Okay. So how that all happened was I kind of started my own little fan page back in ~96, and then I got in contact with the creators of the FAQ. At that time, it was 1.1. A couple of years later, in '98, Michelle Belcher, who was the principal originator of the FAQ, he contacted me and asked what I thought about maybe starting, a listserv group. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. And so he started that on something called OneList. Mm-hmm. He also had, he was talking about, how it was kind of hard to kind of maintain the FAQ because it was being posted on multiple sites and things. And he was trying to centralize that. And so I registered the darklands.net domain. I wanted darklands.com and darklands.org, but they were already taken. So we got darklands.net, and I started the website there for the purpose of hosting the FAQ. And we considered the list to be sort of a living extension of the FAQ itself. That was principally because the origin of the FAQ was kind of consolidating a lot of information that people had been providing on the news groups and things you could look up on Usenet. And so, we thought, okay, since, the NNTP news groups were fading away, he decided to kind of go with a BBS kind of thing. And that's how we got onto the OneList.
Nice.
That eventually got bought out by an outfit called E-Groups, which about a year or so later, Yahoo purchased. What we have now on Groups.io is it's one continuous thing all the way from the very beginning all the way through.
And when did that start? So there's the collected messages. When did the original OneList thing actually start?
The list started in 1998.
So it's been going 22 years, that's pretty amazing. So you have a 22-year history with a list that's now over on groups.io. If people go to the show notes for the show at shaneplays.com, they'll find not only the FAQ, the Darklands FAQ, but the group that is still active. There's a link that you can join. And then also Matt's Darklands website, which is a wonderful love letter to Darklands. But speaking of the group, the listserv, if you will, now Keith Hiorns, who's my buddy, but also a fellow Darklands fan. Now you're part of that group, right? Because every now and then you've sent me stuff off the group. And Matt, without knowing, that we were going to end up having this conversation and, that Matt actually helps run the group. So how long have you been like a fan? Obviously since when did we get the game? Like 93?
93, yeah.
So, but when did you actually sign up? Like I'm as much of a fan, I'm going to sign up to a group.
It was probably near the beginning. I used to have my Yahoo email address exclusively is what I used primarily for webmail. And so it had to have been around that time. Prior to this podcast, I was looking through my old save games and I found some from 1997, which I fired up again. So I know that it was probably around that time frame. And I was constantly looking for more information,
right?
More information on the game. Because at the time, obviously that late 90s, whatever, it's, couldn't find much.
Well, we didn't even have, when we were first playing it, I mean, the internet was around, but we didn't have it.
Right.
Yeah. We didn't even have AOL.
Right.
I mean, because we were living in the dorms without phones.
I even there was a patch, I believe, for Darklands to make it more. There was one last patch before that they were going to support before they basically said, okay, we're done with the game. And I think I mailed them a letter and they mailed me a disc.
Mailed you the patch?
They mailed me the disc with the patch.
This is how long ago this was. Which is crazy because unfortunately when the game first came out, it was kind of buggy. I didn't realize it at the time. In my research since I found that out. So let's talk a little bit. Keith, you're a fan. I'm a fan. Matt's obviously not only a fan, but a community facilitator for the fandom around the game. Let's talk about the game a little bit about itself, because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, there's people listening to this, they have no idea what Darklands is. And we're sitting, we're like, oh, we're doing fan groups, and they're like, why? So Darklands, especially at its time, was a very innovative computer role-playing game from Microprose. The main designer behind it was Arnold Hendrick, who unfortunately we lost back in June of this year. But it is a open world. Now, that may not blow you over right now, but in 1992, that was a pretty big deal. It was an open world fantasy computer role-playing game based in the Holy Roman Empire of the 15th century. But the twist is, it was the Holy Roman Empire as people believed it at the time. So people believed in gargoyles, and they believed in, demons running around, and they believed in werewolves or whatever. And so like in like alchemy's real, you got like the Philosopher's Stone and all of this. And it was bonkers fun. And it was like no other game I had ever played. I played a lot of computer role-playing games up to them. I was a huge, and still am, D&D nerd, but I'd never run into a game like this. I mean, the quote-unquote magic system was completely different. The, I guess, clerical system, like the healing spells, totally different based on this. They tied it into the Catholic Church of the time with saints and all this stuff, and it was totally, you didn't even have to follow the quest of the game. In fact, you didn't even know there was a quest in the game until a long time into playing it. You just wandered around trying to get your fame up and your glory and have adventures. And it was a lot of fun. So, but I definitely remember the setting and the way that alchemy and divine magic, if you even want to call that, being just really striking me different. You had, there was a lot of history of the Holy Roman Empire in the manual. You had this map that was accurate to mainly Germany, but some other areas of Europe at the time. So I'll ask Keith, and then I'll get back to Matt. Keith, what, I remember we were both immediately like, wow, this game's really cool.
Yeah.
So what struck you about it?
So going back to the computer role-playing game, I started pretty early with that, with Ultima was one of my favorite ones with the Commodore 64. And then, so I was already kind of excited about, when I saw the ad for Darklands, about that. When I finally picked it up, when, together, you and I at that time, 93-ish, what struck me about the game, and what still strikes me about the game, is the thoroughness. I mean, there are so many places to start, but the thoroughness, it was just the manual itself was a joy to read through, because the saints you're talking about before, the alchemy, even the creatures in the game were all based on real German mythology. So you could read through this thing, and they had not only how to play the game, but then the last part of the manual was, the saints, basically a history of the time at that time. So on the saints, they had the monetary system was historically accurate. At the end of the manual, they had like pages of a bibliography of references they'd done, historical references. So the scope of the game, the research that was put into the game, and then for me, from the beginning, the character creation. You had a lot of options. You could age your character. I believe the character started at 20 or 25, and you could bump them up by 5 years, which gave you
5-year increments.
Give you more skill points. But then they aged, which eventually it was 8. Yeah. So
and a lot of people will comment on that is very similar to Traveler, which was one of the first role playing games. But it was definitely one of the first science fiction role playing games, where Traveler is famous that your character can die during character creation, because you do your career 5 years at a time, and you can lose a limb or die. Now Darklands isn't to that point, but you do your career 5 years at a time, and your character ages. So you could have a more advanced character, but then their skill set and their abilities decline as they get older. The seasons change. Which it was. I thought it was quite in depth, at the time. Right. It's super. I mean, it's in depth compared to now in a lot of ways. Yeah. So it's super in depth. The CRPG addict I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he runs a blog where he plays like every CRPG published. And he joked around that Darklands was like, after 3 hours of playing it, you could basically have a college level thesis on, but it's not boring. It's not dull. I mean, if you want to go that deep into the manual, you can, but you don't have to. So
Yeah.
Was there anything else before I move over to Matt that just really grabbed you about the game, Keith?
No, like I said, the scope was the first time I'd seen anything resembling that type of sandbox game. You touched on it perfectly, where you could really just wander, take on quests, visit towns, and kind of forget there's a storyline to a point. So no, it was very impressive. A really meaty CRPG at the time for me, and I really enjoyed the depth of the game.
Yeah, I liked that the time system was based on you go from Vespers to, whatever.
Yeah.
Like you have to.
The monastic system.
Yeah, they had that. And then the money system is the Florins and is it Grotians and Finnigs? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
That really immersed me a lot, having to, convert over to that money system. And people, they're like, you don't want to put up all these barriers to people engaging with a game, but I kind of argue against that because that stuff sometimes engages me more with the game. It just enchants me more with the setting and everything going on. So Matt, what was it that grabbed you immediately about Darklands?
It was exactly that. It was the historical aspects as opposed to the usual fantasy aspects. I mean, there are fantasy elements in this, but as you pointed out earlier, it was because of the beliefs of the people at the time. Now, when they say the beliefs of the people at the time, of course, that's not universal. You had people of many, many different worldviews, living in this. This is, after all, the 15th century. So you're at the beginning of the Renaissance. You're after the Black Plague. Humanism is taking hold in Europe, and there's lots of different worldviews, from people with mindsets that we would recognize today, all the way to people who still carried on traditions that were centuries old.
Well, I guess I think it would be fair to say that it was the dominant zeitgeist of the times, though, right? It was
right.
There were other beliefs and ways of living, but it was that sort of what we think of the Holy Roman Empire, which is not the Roman Empire. Okay, the Holy Roman Empire is not the Roman Empire. It was a period roughly 1,000 years long.
Who was that said that the Holy Roman Empire was not holy, nor Roman, nor an empire?
Nor an empire. Yeah, I've heard that quote before. I can't remember, but it was and people argue over when it began and when it ended, but it was roughly about 1,000 years. In Europe, the Catholic Church of the time was a dominant force. And Arnold Hendrick, the designer, I got to give a shout out to some sources, because not only did I play the game again, getting ready to talk about it, but I checked out a lot of different sources, and I've got to give a huge shout out to my friend Matt Barton of Matt Chat. I know he's a mutual friend of Matt here on this episode as well. I'd also like to note that I first became aware of Matt Barton and his Matt Chat YouTube channel through my friend Keith Hiorns, who sent me a link years ago, said, hey, this dude did a video on Darklands. And that was Matt Chat 77 from September of 2010. So that's been almost 10 years ago. I can't remember the exact date that Keith sent me that link, but it's been a while. So there's a lot of important Darklands connections in my life, I guess. But he's got and I'll link all this in the show notes at shaneplays.com. Go there and there'll be an entry for this episode. But he's got a little quick video of Darklands from way back in the day for his channel anyway. It was early
2010, yeah.
Yeah, 2010. Wow, 10 years ago. And then he's got a 3-part interview with Arnold Hendrick, my bad, who is actually, it was one of the only video interviews he ever did.
I think it's actually the only video.
Is it the only one he ever did? And it was
the only one, yeah.
Really good interview. And then I went through, and again, I'm linking this stuff in the show notes. I read through CRPG Addict has like a 9 or 10 part blog series on his playthrough of it. And he's really good at analyzing CRPGs from multiple different aspects. I really enjoy his stuff. So I definitely want to give, a big shout out there. But during that interview with Arnold, he said he in the manual, he went out of his way to say that the Catholic Church of the time of the Darklands is set in is not the Catholic Church of today. They're almost two different things. And he was surprised. He went out of his way to say he never got any complaints and he never got any pushback from anybody over making the game so, central around the Catholic Church. The entire spell system, if you will, is around praying to saints of the Catholic Church. You start with a small number of saints. And then as you travel to these different towns, you learn more saints that you can pray to, and praying to these saints gives you different abilities, almost like casting spells. And then, you can go to mass, you can go to confession. There's holy relics, there's it's, you can go to the church and get healing. And not only that, but the church of the day was massively influential in the culture. But I think if that game came out today, given the way that people are very sensitive to that kind of thing, there would be a lot of discussion over that. But at the time when it came out, he said nobody complained about it or pushed back on him at all, which was very interesting to me. But again, the reason that I brought all that up was that the designer wanted to go out of his way to let people know that this was the Roman Catholic Church as we think of it at that time, and as it was perceived by the people and the supernatural things around it, not necessarily the church that we think of today. It's that was a tangent off the point that you're playing in that era that's known as the Holy Roman Empire. Other things that are really interesting, we've touched on a little bit about the game, is it's an open world RPG right from the very beginning. Keith, do you remember how the game starts? Do you want to set it up? I can do it if you don't.
Yeah. You can create they've got the pre-made party. You can do the pre-made party, or you can go through the character creation process, and then there's a short narration you read through in the beginning, and your party starts out basically in a pub, and then from there you've got certain choices like hyperlinks that you can choose, and you can go to exit the main street, exit the side street, visit the church type thing. So you navigate the city just through this menu system essentially.
And that actually touches on something that I meant to discuss and highlight while we were recording the interview. But I really like the menu system, the menu-driven nature of navigating around and interacting in Darklands. And one of the reasons that I like it so much, I'm one of those people, especially in the early 90s when a lot of games didn't have a mapping system built in, I found it hard to navigate CRPGs, like if I was in a city or a dungeon. And this method allows you to easily find your way around. It says, do you want to go here, 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 here? You click, it opens up another menu. And I thought it made the game smoother while not taking away any of its richness, because a lot of the areas were, do you want to go here or here? And they would use the local, like German name or whatever local flavor was for the individual areas you were going to go.
And the mistake I made in the very beginning of the game over and over again before I figured it out was I exited the city immediately and went into the forest, and my party got slaughtered constantly. So you had to go. Yeah, you basically had to build your party up within the city. And that's another thing too about the game. As a side note, is when your character died, he was dead. And I see that more and more in games these days. But back then, it used to be like you could resurrect your character, you could take him somewhere, but in there, when your character died, you could always load your game again. But if you continued on, that character was dead, and there's really no way that I know of, unless I missed something in the game that you could bring him back. But yeah, so anyway, you started out there.
No, you're right.
You did it. You did the adventures in the city, build your party up, and then from there, you start traveling the land and take on different quests and go from there. So,
and Matt, I never had this happen to me. But I've heard that like your character one of your characters or more can die from old age in the game, and you have to replace them.
Yeah. Normally though, they get old enough that their skills are diminished enough that they'll end up dying in a confrontation. Especially if you've spent enough years before you take on the Templar Monastery and the Citadel of the Apocalypse. Your upper limits are, you can be 100%, but you're diminished because of age, so you can die that way. But yeah, your character can actually die. I've only had it happen to me once.
Okay. Yeah, now I've seen characters die during combat. But yeah, the old age, they can just, because as you adventure, time is passing. It's keeping track of all that. It's keeping track of your character's ages.
Yeah.
And
I think most people, though, will retire a character whose stats, and you retire them and take on another character.
yeah, but that touches on the that kind of open-ended nature of the game, that you can just adventure. You can replace characters. You can retire parties.
Can I ask you guys? Did you guys ever actually complete and win the game? I actually never have. I'll be honest with you. So I never made it to the very end of the plot line.
The actual plot line.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. And it's a little bit of a trick question. How does a game of Darklands end? It doesn't. It doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't have to. Yeah, there is a plot line you can follow.
I say that it doesn't actually end, but you continue on after, but you do finish the quest. And I have done that a number of times.
You have finished the quest a number of times. Okay, yes. So that's an interesting thing about the game. When you can go quite a while playing the game without realizing that there's even a quest. It just kind of, once your fame, I guess, gets, because you have fame in general, sort of like your fame around the realm, your party fame, and then you have local fame. So every city or town or village or whatever you visit, you can build up reputation.
That was another interesting thing about the game, and games at the time were doing that in certain aspects, but the way you were treated, you had random encounters in the road and random encounters in villages, and the way you were treated differed, versus what your fame was in that part of the land, which I thought was interesting as well at the time.
Right. Yeah. You had two different fames. It was literally you had fame and then you had local reputation.
Right.
But it was really two different fame systems. You had local fame and realm wide fame, if you will. And I guess that, because like I said, you can just bumble along and then you'll start getting little hints that something's going on. And then that starts turning into a large storyline. But there's two interesting things about that. One, it seems very natural the way that emerges. Like you're bumbling along playing, just have fun playing the game, and then that storyline kind of emerges. And you don't have to follow up on that storyline unless I misunderstand. You can just keep adventuring around, right? I mean, do you have to follow the quest? Matt,
as far as I know.
No, it's completely optional. And in fact, you have to actively pursue it. A lot of times the hints you check the, want of a better term, check the message board. There's the postings, in town and things like that. You can get, kind of news, rumors and things like that. You can maybe asking a village Schultz about things. You can find out things about maybe dragon infestations, witch activity, and it can come either directly, like maybe there will be something about in a village, rumor about some witch activity somewhere, or it could be sort of actively obfuscated, like maybe the people in the village are acting suspiciously, or you come across some keep somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. There's you sense something evil about it, or there will be a mob sort of besieging a keep. Either they're trying to attack it, or they're folks that want to attack you because they see you as a threat, and so they're protecting the keep.
There's a lot of, I mean, it's, even though it's somewhat based in the real world, remember the game is what people believed at that time. So there's a lot of supernatural activity. Now you can fight bandits and you can fight robber knights and you can fight this and that and the other and giant spiders or whatever. But there is a lot of supernatural activity, and it's usually like witchcraft or just outright as the game would put it, like satanic activity, where there's like demons and stuff, and all this stuff going on.
Which brings us to so how those are tie-ins to the main quest, because you have the witches, the demonic activity, which will lead you to the High Sabbath.
Right, and the High Sabbath is part of the main quest line, right? I don't want to talk too much about that, just in case somebody who hasn't played it wants to go check it out. But you can talk about the main quest line.
Let's not spoil it after 22 years.
Yeah. Well, if somebody's brand new, I mean, one of my goals with the show is to introduce things to people that they are not aware of. So for them, it could be spoilerish. But let's just say that
it's not like that bad uncle that tells you the end of the movie when you just started.
Let's just say that the main quest line involves a lot of witchcraft / supernatural evil activity, and then you'll run into that too without being into the main.
Yeah. For people who do want to get the spoilers, though, there's lots of Let's Play episodes out there. Josh Sawyer, who we know from Obsidian, he just got done. He had a Twitch series, and you can find his first 3 hours and his last 3 hours on his YouTube channel. That's J.E. Sawyer.
Yep, that's out there. He was a big fan of the game. Also, let's talk a little bit about this. It was one of, if not the first, computer role-playing games with a real-time with pause combat system. So let's talk about that real quick. And to do so, I'm going to refer, well, it's not showing up there it is, to my very own book that I co-authored with Matt Barton. He allowed me to come along for the ride, Dungeons and Desktops, The History of Computer Role-Playing Games, second edition. And Darklands is interesting in this book. If you go to the index, Darklands gets a lot more entries than the average game in this book. And the reason is because Matt really talks a lot. I didn't write any of the Darklands stuff in this book, but he really talks a lot about that it was arguably, somebody can come along and say, well, this game or that, but arguably it was the first fantasy or computer role-playing game or whatever that had a real-time with pause combat system. So he talks about that a lot. And then he talks about the setting. It's this really rich, historically accurate, and I guess also, what do you call it, superstitionally accurate, Dark Ages setting. So he talks about that. But some of the things that I highlighted in here, we already talked about the character processes, a lot like Traveler or Mega Traveler. The goal of the game is simply to win fame and fortune. There's not even a defined ending, even though there is that quest, that main quest that you can follow. This still fascinates me. Clerics can discover and call on 130 different saints, each with a unique with unique personality. And you learn these saints by visiting with monks in different cities and stuff. And then he talks again about Darklands is the first CRPG with real-time with pause combat, which, of course, the Infinity engine that, Baldur's Gate 2, and some other games used, refined real-time with pause to, like, the ultimate, really, people love that combat system. I'm not a big fan of real-time with pause. I'd rather have turn-based tactical because that's just, I don't know, I play a lot of tabletop role-playing games, but the real-time with pause in Darklands doesn't bother me. I think because it's like they only have a few options they can do in combat. So once you issue orders, they just go at each other and start banging on each other. Whereas real time of pause in some of these other games, there's spells and this and all this other stuff going on, and it can get out of control really quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't even think Keith, I don't even really remember when I played it, like being struck like, well, this is some crazy combat system. But maybe it's been so long that I've forgotten. It just felt smooth.
The combat system itself, like as far as the real-time combat, I thought was smooth and flowed well. But even at the time, once you got used to the controls, on a keyboard, it was fine. But even at the time, if I remember right, that may have been one of the criticisms of the game is that it was a little clunky as far as the interface. I don't know if you remember it being that way at all or not, but
I think it's mostly the pathfinding was clunky.
Maybe that's what. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but, that's what they were actually feeling. Was pathfinding, because you would say to go here and do that, and they're not doing it.
Yeah, we ran into that quite a bit.
Oh,
It
go
was
ahead.
enjoyable, but yeah, the once you got used to the combat system, it was interesting. It was fun, and yeah, like you said, it was kind of seamless. I didn't really notice a difference between the role playing games I was used to.
It felt
Yeah.
smooth to
So
me at the time. I remember
Yeah.
that. Like, I don't remember thinking, this is weird or anything like that.
Yeah, I was used to more turn-based, like you were talking about, like Pool of Radiance and
for me, my investment in turn-based up to that point was that in the realm of grand military strategy kind of thing. I didn't have a personal history in CRPGs with the turn-based. I played those later after Darklands. So for me, it seemed completely natural because it was my my baptism, as it were, in that area.
Yeah, the computer.
But Baldur's Gate people, they actually cited Darklands as their inspiration for going with the real time with pause.
Yeah, I've got some examples here of some games that Darklands inspired, and I'll get to those here in a second. First, I'm going to throw out some quick show notes, and then we'll get back to that. But folks, I want to remind people that for today's show and for any show I do, you can go to shaneplays.com, and there'll be a link there for this episode, and it'll have all the links that we discussed on this show, and then sometimes I'll even add some other stuff. There'll definitely be links to the Darklands group we talked about, and the Darklands Fact, Darklands.net, Matt Chat interviews, CRPG Addict, other stuff will definitely be linked there, so go check that out. Last week's show is out now. You can find it on the blog and other places, and it was episode 225, Art Bell Tribute to UFO News Explosion. I'm seriously, when I say UFO News Explosion, I'm not joking. There's so much news out there right now on UFOs. It's crazy. And a lot of it is like official, like the Pentagon and, quote unquote official sources are kind of talking about it more openly now. So it's a really interesting episode. The podcast does go out on my blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, YouTube, and more. And last but never ever least, Shane Plays is also carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi, kryptonradio.com. And I encourage you to follow one or both of my Twitter feeds. I have two different Twitters. One is at Shane Plays, ShanePlays. The other one is ShanePlays PR. So it's either Shane Plays or Shane Plays PR. And the reason that I encourage you to follow those is because I'm constantly putting out links from like Humble Bundle and other links that you can save a lot of money using these links. And it doesn't make me rich, but it puts a little bit of money in my pocket, which I never complain about. I don't run a lot of ads or anything on this show, although I do have a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com, Shane Plays, if you'd like to support the show that way. But anyway, so on Twitter, Shane Plays is where I never shut up. I'm constantly tweeting. 8 billion tweets a day. It never stops about everything. Shane Plays PR is much more PR, public relations. It's much more, about promoting either the show or like affiliate links and that kind of thing. So if you want to keep up, but you don't want every little thought that crosses my fevered mind, you might want to follow Shane Plays PR. But either way, I'd love to have you. So let's get back. Let's talk a little bit, guys, about some of the games that that this has influenced. Now, as Matt mentioned right before I did those quick show notes, this game influenced Baldur's Gate and the Infinity Engine with the real time with pause combat. And Josh Sawyer was with BioWare, and they ended up with an Obsidian, and he was there, way back in the day. So he would know. And he's the one who's been quoted as saying that. And then as Matt was pointing out, he's actually got some video where he did a Twitch stream, for going through Darklands and showing that off. Another game that it might surprise people to know is Todd Howard. And he was the main person behind the Elder Scrolls and was still, but he's the guy who kicked it off, stayed with the franchise. He said, quote, and the link will be in the show notes if you want to go get the source on this. He said, the main inspiration from the Elder Scrolls comes from games like Ultima Underworld, Darklands, and Legends of Valor, and of course D&D. The whole idea was to do a grand RPG where you could do pretty much whatever you wanted. So Darklands, if you like the Elder Scrolls, some of Darklands DNA is in the Elder Scrolls. And then there's a game that I personally love a lot. There's a game called Serpent in the Staglands from Well Not Studios that came out, I don't know, 3 years ago or so. And they've cited Darklands as an influence, and the visual style is very similar to Darklands, including and also the combat style is very similar to Darklands. So those are just a few of the games and the developers that Darklands inspired. And it's really interesting. I have a quote here from Arnold Hendrick. Now, you guys may already know this stuff, but I did a fairly deep research dive over the past few days. So I'm just learning some of the behind the scenes on Darklands now, even though I've loved the game for so long. But while Matt Barton on Matt Chat was interviewing Arnold Hendrick, the main developer, although he had a whole team, but he was the main designer on this game, he said he was the most proud because he's done a lot of different games. He worked on Pirates with Sid Mead. He worked on, I know, Matt, earlier in the show you were talking about that you like military sims and that sort of thing. He worked on, I think, like at least one, like F-14 stealth fighter and some stuff. So he worked on a lot of different stuff while he was at Microprose.
Yeah, and besides that, his career started in around 73, 74, and so there was a decade before he joined Microprose that he was designing tabletop strategy military simulations. So he has a degree in military history, so he had a deep understanding of history and military.
Yep, and so then he brought all that forward into his career. But he said, yeah, it was for Darklands. Speaking of Darklands, it said it was the game he was most proud of from a historical and creative standpoint. But here's what's interesting. He went on to say that although it was the one he's the most proud of from a historical and creative standpoint, he straight out said it was the most disastrous from a project management standpoint. And this led him to become interested in project management and ultimately to becoming a game producer as well as a designer. So before they could finish Darklands, they had to pull in almost all of the studio from Microprose to get the game finished, which was definitely not anticipated when they began the project.
And then it still wasn't finished even at the end.
Yeah. They said, okay, ship it, get it on the truck. Anyway, yeah, he said at the time that it shipped, Darklands was Microprose's most expensive game to produce as of 1992. And Microprose was at the time, they were no small studio. I mean, you knew the name. He said that it took 2 to 3 years to make and cost around $3 million, which was a huge budget at the time. But, when he was interviewing with Matt Barton several years ago, he said, it's small now. And he said the problem was they had an ambitious scope, but they just jumped in. They didn't figure out how they were going to implement all these ideas and how long that it would take and how much it would cost. But they just jumped in and started doing it. So as a result of that pain, he started getting really interested in project management. So
that's funny, Matt, because you mentioned that you first heard of Darklands when you were around 30, and I remember seeing ads in the back of the computer gaming magazines for Darklands when I was in high school. So Zinger in high school on that one.
Just twist the knife, Keith.
It's just
twist that knife.
We're talking about historical significance and how it kind of ties into what we're talking about. So.
Yeah. See, I don't remember. I feel like I remember my first exposure was that cover art. I saw it in a shop, and that cover art grabbed my attention. For many reasons. There's many reasons why the cover art grabbed my attention.
It's a classic cover. Classic cover art. Yeah, classic style, I should say.
And I remember buying it, and I think
we actually know where that cover painting is at too.
Oh, where is it?
Where?
It was I have his contact information. There was a fellow who purchased it for, I think it was right in the
a florin and grotions.
Maybe it's right around in the 6,000 range, I believe it was.
Wow.
It was auctioned off on eBay.
Okay, I'd like to have that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was auctioned off by the original painter himself. That's not the original art I remember seeing. I saw. Well, you can go to Computer Gaming World, January through March of 1991, and see an early ad for it. And it was kind of a half-done ad. And then there was another promotional ad that was in a few publications very briefly, that was based on that, but more fully fleshed out. If you get the boxed game, you can find a Microprose flyer advertising other products like Civilization, F-117 Stealth Fighter 2.0, Hyperspeed, and Gunship 2000 that actually has a prior box cover that was going to be used before they came up with the one that they actually used in the end.
So what elements did that art have? Because the only art I ever know is...
It also had the man and the woman, the same warriors. Slightly less, more clothes.
Slightly less enthusiastic.
Yeah, and you saw behind them coming over the ridge some knights in armor, and then in the very background saw a Disney-esque castle, something like what you have there in Bavaria, that what they call him, like Crazy King Ludwig II.
Right. I want that art to have, which I doubt that it does. It's this happy Disney castle, but leaning out of the top window is a robber knight shaking his fist towards the viewer.
Unites.
Which is Robber Knight is a Raub Britain.
Yeah, it's basically just you can get a lot of money early in the beginning of the game, because getting money in this game is not easy. You got to earn it. This game makes you earn your skills and your increases in your money. But Robber Knights, like, it's one of the more common quests. You'll get sent on the same kind of quest a lot, especially if you're not following the main storyline, which I don't care. It's fun. But like, they'll change the name. They're like, go get Robber Knight Bob. And then next time it's Robber Knight, Chuck. It's the same thing. It's just different
same menu options to get in the
exactly right. And
but it was fun. Yeah.
What'll happen is, like, 3 different people in the same city will pay you to take the Robber Knight out. So you just go around and like, I was reading CRPG Addict, and he was going to different cities near the Robber Knight, getting people to pay him to go take the Robber Knight out. And when enough people had ponied up, he'd go take the Robber Knight out. And that's a way that you can make some money pretty quick, because making money in this game is not easy, and keeping up your armor and your weapons and your training is not cheap. So it's hard to build wealth in this game. It really, in one way, tell me if you guys agree with this, the game really is a constant grind, but it's a fun grind. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that, but I pretty much find that to be the case with pretty much all CRPGs. You have combat after combat after combat. Each one is unique and interesting, but it can be, another set of orcs. Kind of. Of course, we don't have orcs in this game. Yeah, we do have the kobolds, and we have dwarves, and we have gnomes. Yeah. We even have cave bears.
Yeah, but they are what the Middle Ages German version of those things would be. So your kobold running around in a mine in Darklands isn't going to be the kobold from D&D. It's a totally different thing.
No.
That's the actual.
Yeah, it's more historically based. One of the things that was a disappointment was that there was never any follow-ups to this. And it's because Microprose kind of came into difficult financial position. Darklands, maybe they probably could have weathered it better, with the expense of this game an earlier time, but it came along just right at the right time, and it put them in a position that Spectrum Holobyte was able to purchase them. And of course, Spectrum Holobyte was not really, they were into what Microprose was traditionally known for, and that was your military simulations.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There was Matt. I remember some of the back and forth on the Darklands group online was talk of that group, members of that group, getting together and actually doing a remake of Darklands, kind of on the side.
Oh, yeah,
Remember that?
Well, where is
yeah,
the
not
source
not
code?
just once. There's many times.
There are many. Yeah.
I mean, where is the source code? Does anybody know?
I
Is
am
it
glad
Spectrum
you brought that
Holobyte,
up.
or-
Yeah, so one of the main things that was a quest of the original fact authors was to somehow try to convince Microprose to either release the original source code
Release
or
the Snyder
rights.
cut? Release the Hendrick cut.
Yeah, or sell a license or something to it. But there was a lot of speculation that, well, maybe they don't even have the source code anymore. Back in the day, keeping backups of everything wasn't necessarily a common business practice.
Well,
They
maybe we
own
got
the IP.
lucky. Maybe we got lucky in that disc they sent Keith to update to patch his game has the source code on it.
I'm sure I've got it somewhere.
I just had
Actually,
a major
I
dumb moment.
probably have actually a binary collecting, trying to document Darklands for ever since eBay came around. I've been trying to collect as many different copies of the different versions because there was the original public release was what they called version 4, and then there was version 5 and version 5.1 and version 6, and then the final one which you can get in diskette form, and also was the version CD-ROM that was actually licensed to have GT, the Good Times Interactive, produce. That was version 7. That was the final version.
What was the Good Times Interactive? What is that?
A Good Time. You ever heard of GTI? Well, what you are buying on like a GOG and Steam is the GTI CD ROM version of version 7 of Darklands that came out in the spring of 90. Well, the version 7 came out in spring of 93. And then GTI published this CD-ROM version in 95. There was 2 different versions. There was the one that Microprose themselves actually sold, and then there was the one that was sold. Actually, I guess there's 3 versions. There's the one that GTI sold directly themselves, and then there was the one that was licensed out to other groups that were, creating these various game packs, where you would buy a bunch of different CDs in one pack.
Oh, right.
That's what I remember. Yeah, I actually bought that pack just for Darklands, Matt. I remember that one now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one of the complaints about the game with those early CD-ROM distributions was that you eventually get to a point in the game when you try to leave a city and you have to answer what's this alchemy
it's
symbol?
The copy protection.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to do that in my recent replay where I got challenged and I had to go in the manual and find the symbol.
Well, yes, and so on the FAQ, we actually created the JPEG and the GIF little image of that sheet. There, in some distributions, there was this little sheet that had all those codes on it, had the picture, and then it said what it was, and you didn't have to go look them up in the manual because you didn't have the manual. And then there were others that didn't have that, and those people were kind of like, they paid for the game, but they couldn't play it beyond a certain point because, unless they made a lucky guess, they would get kicked out of the game. So we actually, for the FAQ, we created that and then published that as part of the FAQ. I think that was FAQ 2.0.
I had completely forgotten about that till I ran across it the other day. It doesn't challenge you very often, but every now and then it does.
No, but it can get to a point to where it's very persistent,
Okay.
And so we actually a co-moderator on the Darklands group, Joel McIntyre, who's one of the people who's made some of the numerous editors and things for the game. He come up with a very elegant solution. There was he and Mark Wallace had done the vast majority of the work of reverse engineering all the file formats. in the game. In particular, the animation and the graphics formats. And so Joel created a application to be able to edit the graphics images in the game. And sort of as a proof of concept exercise, he took all of those pages that were used for that copy protection, and he put the answer into the image. And you can actually download that off of the darklands.net, take those files, copy them into your...
Oh, and then the answer is in the... Okay, so when it gives you the copy protection, that's pretty smart.
Yeah.
Do we know... I know we were talking...
we were talking about the files.
Yeah, do we know what the legal status is of the source code?
Yes.
I mean, where are we...
There's a whole paper trail of IP ownership. So after Microprose, Spectrum Holobyte, they sold to Infogrammus, and then Infogrammus sold about a year and a half later to a Hasbro, and they held that property in their Hasbro Interactive division. They also bought rights to Atari. What they did with that property was they had created Atari North America for all of their North America operations. And they also, by the way, a couple of years before this, GTI tried to buy Microprose, but they failed in that bid. Then Hasbro had bought Atari, and they had also bought GTI. So they created Atari Interactive, and they put Darklands under the management of Atari Interactive. It's a subsidiary of Atari North America. And then Atari North America and Atari Interactive, of course, they filed for bankruptcy in 2011. So there was a large catalog of Microprose titles that went up for auction. I think it was Wargamer bought a lot of them, but Tomo bought quite a number of those too. There's a document that we have links up to in the Darklands group under the links page to the actual court documents about the result of those auctions.
It's a quick footnote here. Matt reached out to me after the recording and said he had realized that he got something, he said, backwards. Hasbro actually acquired Microprose first. They also acquired Wizards of the Coast and formed Hasbro Interactive. This was just after the failed attempt by GTI Interactive to buy Microprose. Hasbro also acquired the rights to the Atari brand. Not long after, they sold Hasbro Interactive minus Wizards of the Coast, which on a side note from me, not Matt, that was a very smart move because Hasbro is making a lot of money through Wizards of the Coast right now on both Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering. But anyway, so after they sold Hasbro Interactive minus Wizards of the Coast and the Atari IP to Infograms, who themselves had bought GTI. Ironically, Infograms rebranded itself under the Atari banner and placed their newly acquired IP under GTI, which they rebranded as Atari Interactive. This remained so for pretty much through the 2000s until the Atari bankruptcy. Anyway, Matt says, I wanted to point out that I think I got the Hasbro and Infograms acquisitions backwards. But hey, we were on a roll, didn't want to lose the momentum. And thanks for the follow-up there, Matt. I was just impressed with everything he knew anyway. Just talking off the top of his head during the interview, whether it was backwards or not, I was pretty impressed with that portion of Matt's commentary. Well, that's okay. So there's a chain of custody. There's
but Tomo Inc. Yeah, so they got rights to the IP. So that didn't mean though that they had all the source code and all that kind of stuff. It just means that they own the IP at that point.
So it's not abandonware. I mean, we're not.
No, it never was abandonware. Never, ever was. Despite what some of my friends might say, and of course, ultimately they're proven wrong. But
yeah,
the thing is that that's when you first saw Darklands appear on GOG in 2011. And then 2 years later, you saw them appear on Steam.
So it's been out. Yeah. They've been available again that long. I didn't realize they'd been out there again that long. I know Night Dive helped get them ready.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah.
They joined forces with Night Dive Studios to get a DOS box package to run. With Darklands, and that kind of work, that partnership between Tomo and Night Dive, they formed that Retroism. Now things have changed though, just since the beginning of this year. Now there's a new company in Denver, or just in the outskirts of Denver, called Ziggurat Interactive, who have bought up a lot of these
news. Yeah, lead with that. Yeah, tell us about it, and I got to start wrapping.
Okay, so I don't know a whole lot about Ziggurat. I haven't talked to any of those people yet, but they own the IP for it now. And getting back to the Darklands source code, it's kind of exciting. Was I had started a thread on Steam in the Darklands BBSs the forum about. What's this Ziggurat Interactive? I just looked them up, and they'd only been formed the October of 2019, so they were pretty new. Nobody knew anything about them really. And what happened, eventually, so Arnold got on, to the thread and made a couple statements.
Arnold, you're talking about Arnold Hendrick himself.
Yes, Arnold Hendrick himself. But then the exciting thing was, he had kind of spilled the beans that Doug Watley, who was one of the two lead programmers on Darklands, actually had found, it's the found it up in the attic story. He come across a box of Darklands IP from back in the day. And with these big old tapes that they used to use for backing up, all the source code and everything, they're like, reel-to-reel tapes. He took, and there's a lot of handwritten notes by Arnold and all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
And he's donated all that stuff to the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's going to be up to the Strong to, get the information off of those tapes and stuff. But we have high hopes that.
And I'm going to delete this from the broadcast version, so for legal liability, but what I want to do, I think we should break into the Strong.
Good plan.
We should get that source code, and a few months from now, a new game that's a spiritual successor will come out that's going to be called Darkish Lands.
All the characters have our faces.
Yeah, Darkish Lands.
Yeah.
Darkish.
So, but
same game, new name.
Yeah, but that's going to lead to other crimes. Like we're going to have to break into a living history museum that actually has the hardware that can read those tapes.
Those are details, mere details. But see, it's just like in Darklands. If you don't get caught, you don't take a virtue hit.
Yeah.
Twilight Lands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we just take an essence.
Dusklands.
Or we just take an essence of grace.
Yeah. Get our virtue back up. Yeah. So I want to touch on a couple more points, and then I got to let us go. I've appreciated y'all's time so much. As with so many shows, it feels like we're just getting warmed up when it's time to.
I could talk so much more about this.
Yeah. Well, I encourage people, go to groups.io, search for Darklands, and all of the message history is backed up there. But I did want to throw out a little bit more information. The game was released in 1992. Currently, and there wasn't enough historical data on Metacritic to give it, a rating, but on Steam, it's very positive with 138 reviews. And GOG, it's got a 4.6 out of 5. So it's not just feelings of nostalgia. It's a good game. People who are playing it now are giving it, since 2011 or whatever, are giving it good ratings. Now, unfortunately, I think one of the reasons why it didn't get more well-known at the time, even though there's people who played it and it influenced them, was it actually, according to Arnold Hendrick, it sold very well the first month. But in subsequent months, it actually got negative sales numbers because it had a major bug in it that they weren't aware of, and people were returning the game. And it took them 6 months to fix that bug. So the damage was done there. And as Matt pointed out earlier, Microprose's finances weren't super strong at the time. So that kind of killed any chance of a sequel right then, and then after it got bought and the IP got passed around and all that.
And then there was a bug. There's a famous bug called the neon hair bug that was still outstanding. It wasn't a showstopper by any means, but
neon. Well, see, then you see that's a feature, not a bug. It's both a medieval fantasy game and a cyberpunk game, and it's a win-win.
Yeah,
what are people complaining about?
Across many genres.
What are people complaining about?
There was actually a bounty on this bug for anybody who could reproduce the bug that in such a way that it led to a fix Actually, of course, it was actually fairly easy to figure out in retrospect years later, but by that time there was nobody around to pay the bounty.
I think there should be a patch that lets me have the neon hair because I want it.
Yeah, it's actually a Stack Overflow.
Oh, it's a Stack Overflow.
Oh, interesting.
All right. I hate that website. They're the problems for everything. Oh, you mean a real Stack Overflow? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me touch on a couple of things here. Again, this game was unique for the alchemy and the prayer system, completely different from the spells and all that stuff that you could brew your own potions. You could get your the Philosopher's Stone. You could keep improving your Philosopher's Stone. You could get run out of astrological shops by cranky astrologers. It was real easy to offend those guys. And unfortunately, you couldn't sneak back at night and stab them in the back. Not that I would. I'm just saying that option wasn't in the game. Now,
well, actually, if you could climb the walls, you might be able to get back.
Yeah, you could climb the walls. They give you so many options to avoid paying the toll.
Use divine intervention to fly over the wall.
Yeah, they'd be like, yeah, you could, they're like, we're not going to let you in and have an audience with the Rar whoever, the Rar schmucker. And then you pray and they let you in. And then it's great. And they gave you like 73.6 options not to pay the gate toll. There's so many ways not to pay the gate toll. You can schmooze the guards. You can go through a sewer. You can climb over whatever. You can go sleep in a grove. It's got everything. But one thing I want to point out, another thing I think that was kind of, I don't know if it was brand new, but it was unique and somewhat innovative for the time, was the way your skills increased were by use or training. You didn't level up in this game.
It was classless, right.
Yeah. You didn't level up in this game. You didn't have a class. The way you got to where like a gerbil couldn't give you a beat down was your armor and your weapons and your skills. So,
and we didn't even get into, the whole thing about, building your characters through careers and stuff.
Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about that with the character creation where you could give different skills, but yeah, we could, this game was feature rich, if you will. Rich.
Still saving for today.
So I'm enjoying it thoroughly, playing it again now.
Yeah.
I think Matt Barton could spend a week just making characters in this game.
He could, he loves doing that. But yeah, you got the character creation where you give 5-year careers at a time to get skills and stuff, and then you get old, and unlike society today, they just shove you aside, and
We've advanced so much.
There's so much more we could say, but this is a really cool game. You can get it on GOG.
It's great. Yeah.
You could.
You just have to come in knowing that the graphics are not going to be, what you're used to today.
They're charming though. I love the graphics. Like when I played Serpent in the Darklands, which is, I love these kind of graphics because it makes your imagination engage even more.
Yeah, and people shouldn't. You're playing it. Say you're playing it in DOSBox. You shouldn't think that what you're hearing from the audio is necessarily what the game actually sounded like in situ, I guess you could say. On original hardware with like your AdLib and your Sound Blaster 16 and your
it was different
and your Roland MT and everything because you really. It had some really fine music that was created for it. I just love playing some of the music as just background music. Matter of fact, that reminds me, when you get the GOG or Steam versions, right now they don't include those bonus
the
things like
soundtrack or anything.
Yeah, well, there was the jukebox and the art gallery, and there was an editor that they provided, although the editors that have come out since then are much better. Matter of fact, there's one fella who over on Bay 12 Games, the home of Dwarf Fortress, created something called the Darklands Companion, which is the best editor yet. It actually allows you to see your properties in real time as the game is playing in a separate Windows-based window, and you can modify them. You can modify them in real time. It's really something.
Yeah,
it's worth looking up. You can download it from GitHub, I believe.
Yeah, I found some helper programs. I didn't find that one specifically, but one area where Darklands did not innovate was in quest tracking, because it was back in that as there's
this does that in real time.
Yeah, there's some helper applications that do that. But Arnold Hendrick's unapologetic about that in his interview. He's like, yeah, we made the game when the expectation was that you'd have to put a little bit of effort into it. So, he's like,
right.
Yeah,
well, sometimes you had to put effort into, sometimes you had to put effort into just getting the game to run if you were the kind of person who had a lot of stuff that you like to run. You had to kind of, by the time 7.0 came out with all the patches and stuff like that, you had to have like 605 or 608 megs of kilobytes, excuse me, of RAM available. Plus, you had to have EMS enabled as well.
I remember that.
That's no problem. You just have a boot profile, and you just flip those IRQs around, and the next thing you're off to the races. Just IRQ.
I think the only game that I had more trouble getting going was probably Falcon 3.0 at that time.
I distinctly remember back in the day having either boot profiles that you chose from, or literally boot profiles on a floppy disk that you would pop in to try to get under that 640K of memory or whatever.
Batch file. And then
because you had, and we're getting way off in the weeds and then we're done. But back in the day, uphill 3 different ways. There you had you had 640 kilobytes of memory, and that was it. Yeah. And then everything else was this extra memory, and there was a certain amount of stuff that had to load into that 640. And there was so many.
And of course your zero page came out of it too.
Say what the what did?
Oh, and that your zero page and your drivers and all that kind of stuff took away from that 640. So
Well, let me tell you. The machine I played Darklands on first, 486 DX266 with a math coprocessor, baby.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Man.
You were.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. You were the rich kid.
Yeah, I had a 386
I took out a loan
SX.
for that computer. You had a
still paying it back. 27 years later.
Actually,
pretty much.
I can say I traded in one of my Amigas to get a custom build 386 to play this.
Nice.
And also Falcon 3.0, the same.
Nice.
I
remember
SX,
that turning point where all the Amiga lovers started looking at what was going on with DOS, with the graphics cards and the Sound Blaster and everything, and started going that way. So, all right, guys, it's been a pleasure, folks. It's Darklands. And also keep an eye out for somewhat shadowy lands.
Darker lands.
Yeah, exactly.
As soon as somebody, I don't know who, not me, gets their hands on the old source code there, you'll just think Neon Hair is crazy at that point.
Lands at a slight sunset.
A momentary cloud lands.
Exactly.
Well, thanks again. That's
all right,
Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
me too. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, that was Matt Wirkkala, Keith Hiorns.
That's Hiorns.
And go Hiorns. My just recently Google Voice stopped, Keith. I go, okay, Google, and I go, yeah, whatever. And I'd say, I call Keith Hiorns, and it's lighting up right now. And it would go, okay, call Keith Hiorns. And I'm like, what the?
I was telling Matt, I've answered to it all. You name it, I've answered to it all.
Yeah.
No surprise.
Just lately, it started saying, hi, Orns. So,
it's working out the kinks.
it's working it out. So anyway, everybody, Keith Hiorns and Matt Wirkkala, check out the darklands.net and check out the group, the Darklands group, if you will, at groups.io. And folks, I got it. No, I almost forgot to do the bad joke of the week. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
Okay. Are you ready for the bad joke? Why were the Dark Ages a thing?
I don't know. Why were they a thing?
Well, it's because there were so many nights.
Oh,
that is the correct response.
That's pretty bad.
That is the correct response. Thank you very much. I'm going to shuffle my papers here one more time. Folks, go play Darklands. You'll like it. I started playing it again to research for the show, and I'm going to keep going. It's
been fun to fire it up again.
Yeah, it's fun to play.
I was going to say, it gets the imagination going with what ifs,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. What if I could sneak back at night on that mean astrologer?
Source code again.
I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter at all. All right. We'll catch you guys later. Thank you so much.
Sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/Shane Plays.